Good morning. We've got a busy week this week, and you're going to be tackling some subject matter that's going to be a little challenging. I'm just going to warn you ahead of time. We'll talk about that in a minute. Um, I thought I'd start off with I saw a meme this morning that made me think of you guys. It was a picture of a teacher doing exactly what I'm doing here, sitting in front of a TV screen. And the quote the teacher was saying, what the teacher used to say, uh, being being a streamer or a YouTuber is not a profession. Teacher now. Get it? Well, anyway, you got to think about it. Maybe you saw the meme. So back in my spot here, there's Bear. Whoop, where are you, Bear? There he is. See him back there in the background, chilling out with me. Where to begin? Okay, so a lot of what you're going to do this week is going to hopefully seem somewhat familiar because we hit the highlights of all of this kind of stuff: civil rights movement, civil rights leaders, going all the way back to the Harlem Renaissance. So, we did all that a little bit in U.S. history. I can't remember how deeply we went, um, but we're going to go deep this week. So you're going to have to put your big boy pants on and just be ready for some things that can be a little challenging and in some cases a little offensive. But I think that the overall message is going to be going to be worth it. So starting off today, familiar stuff. W.E.B. Du Bois. Hopefully you remember him. We'll look at him a little bit more uh, in terms of his philosophy this time around, instead of just the general dynamic of who he was as an important figure in the early 20th century. You want to pay particular attention to his concept of uh, the veil and the color line. What does W.E.B. Du Bois have to say about the way things are that especially he wants white people to recognize? Now, before I go any further with this, I know what you're thinking, or maybe you're thinking it. I know I'm not a black guy, and that probably robs me of a little bit of credibility for challenging you to really take this week's lessons to heart. Um, you probably noticed that already. I feel really strongly about this. So let me give you, what qualifies me to be able to even say anything or direct you toward things about this topic of the African American experience in the 20th century. Well, I probably shared this back in U.S. history. When I was when I had gone back to school, I took every African American history class that I could. I did an internship with the Black History Project in Bloomington Normal. This was what I wanted to do my graduate studies in. My advisor was an African American scholar, uh, and and he was just brutally honest with me and said that there probably wasn't going to be much of a career for me as a white man teaching Black history. So, I do have a lot of background. I do have a lot of knowledge. I don't pretend for a moment to understand deeply and to know what it's like to be Black in America in the middle of the 20th century. But hopefully, some of the things you're going to see this week will help you get a sense of what that's all about. So, when you're looking at the first video today, pay attention to what Du Bois has to say about the veil and about the color line. That's going to be really important. Um, then you've got this triangle, which I've kind of boiled down to three words: the racism in America in particular, but in general, it revolves around these three ideas. It's kind of like this triangle, right? Can I do a I can't do a triangle, but there you go. Um, it all begins with the fact that somebody doesn't look like you, and they automatically are categorized as the other by you, even at an unconscious level. Freud would say. Um, but then culture starts kicking in and society starts kicking in. So language is used in a certain way. And you're going to see that in the video clip that shows a young Malcolm X in prison. Denzel Washington is playing Malcolm X. He's in prison. This is happening in the 1950s. And he's being shown by a man who is a representative of the Nation of Islam. So you may need to kind of look down the road at some of the subsequent homework plans. You have a handout that on one side it says Malcolm X and the Nation of Islam. Might not hurt to read that first before you start looking at these Malcolm X film uh, clips that you're going to see today and tomorrow. That might help give you a little bit more context. So that where Baines has taken Malcolm X to the dictionary to look at the differences just in the words, the way black and white are portrayed. That's an illustration of the way language reinforces the otherness of the other. And then finally, of course, you've got the whole legal system. Laws are put in place, and they can cut both ways. Laws can bring equity, or laws can reinforce the disparity between people. So those three forces are what are always at work in everything that you're going to be looking at during the course of this week. So we've talked about Malcolm X. Try to remember what you learned. It's really important that you try to connect with things that are in the back of your mind from what we learned in the past. So the film that you're going to be watching, the documentary film, that revolves around a last book that James Baldwin, the great African American writer of the middle 20th century, was working on and working toward publication. It's called "I Am Not Your Negro." As you watch it, you will see that Baldwin is a very provocative fellow, and you're just gonna have to roll with that and be. He is so articulate. He's so thoughtful. You've got to listen to him whether you agree with what he's saying or not. You need to have an open mind. At the end of the week, we'll come back and we'll do a little bit of debriefing. But this week, it's going to hit you hard with some stuff, both ways. Both those of you who aren't white and those of you who are white. It's going to hit all of us hard. But I think it's going to be worth it by the time we get to the end of the week. So the Baldwin documentary focuses on three figures. The first, Medgar Evers, who we didn't really talk about very much. And so you're going to get a little bit of a more education on him. He represents the NAACP mentality about the African American situation in the middle 20th century. Then, of course, Martin Luther King Jr., you're very familiar with him. He represents this first wave of nonviolent, passive resistance civil rights activity. And then it's going to also look at Malcolm X as that second wave, willing to be violent, black power oriented, more radical civil rights activity that's going on in the middle to the late 60s. So pay attention to, at some point, Baldwin is going to say why he was not a black Muslim, and why he was not a member of the Black Panther Party, why he was never a member of the NAACP. This says something about him, and it says something more about what he sees as the weaknesses of each of those three positions. So I want you to pay attention to that. I have to show you my little system of, what do you call these things that you're reading off of? I don't remember. Okay, but this is also going to tie in, the Baldwin film is going to tie in a lot to some of the pop culture stuff that we were talking about before break. Look at how much he equates race with consumerism. Look at how much he equates race with media and pop culture. He's going to connect with a lot of things that you're reading about in the Postman book. So kind of keep your mind open for that. There's going to be a weird thing when it gets toward the end, and it's talking more specifically about pop culture, and it's looking at portrayals of African Americans. You're going to see this weird game show. It was called The Gong Show, and they had this unbelievably racist caricature of this older black man who would come out and just dance, and everybody would go crazy. So I figured you're not going to have the context to understand what in the world that is. That was called The Gong Show, and all I can say is I'm sorry that it ever existed. So that's some of the stuff that you're going to be doing this week. Keep in mind, especially the role that language plays in all of this. we started talking a little bit when we were talking about structuralism, about the way language structures are used to uh, to keep the people who are in power in power. But what's going to be happening here is that we're going to deal with later in class. The beginning of the postmodern shift is something called post-structuralism, where people who are kind of marginalized and oppressed, who have been controlled by language, start figuring out we can take the power back by taking over that language. So that's where you're gonna chafe when when you hear this use of the N word by African American, uh, in this case men, but um, it's part of this post-structural shift that is taking the power away from the people who are exercising power and control in society. So keep all that in mind. What I'd like you to do is, as you're watching some of these videos, post some comments on this video on the YouTube channel. And then when we get to the end of the week, I'll do another kind of follow-up video where we'll debrief a little bit and we'll talk about how we think about all of this. But I want to see some posts. I want to see you interacting with the videos, and that's going to be part of your weekly average sort of class participation grade. All right, so I'll be back in a few days, and we'll kind of talk about what's going on. And thought there was one more thing. No, I think I hit everything that I needed to today. So you're good. All right. I love you guys, and I'll be back with you in a few days. I've got a bunch of thought papers to grade right now. See you later.